right, I'm just trying to get myself situated here, folks. I just got back from grad school just a few minutes ago, so I'm in the midst of setting up from that and just being sure that I have everything to make this as efficient as possible. Let me know right now kind of if you have any questions, what you would like the focus of tonight to be. If you have any specific questions you want me to be sure I answer, let me know how goes it, humans. 4 of you are watching now. Okay. Looks like I see a few of you saying hey. Okay. So y'all, I want to go ahead and get started as soon as possible. I'm tired. I know you guys are tired. And I would just love if this can be a super efficient evening. My apologies, grad school. We were told we were going to get out late, and it was like 7:40, and I was like, oh, awesome. And then we didn't end up leaving until like 8:05. So then I had to come home and get my computer and everything set up. So I appreciate y'all's patience. We're doing the period 8.1 review. Let me just double check, make sure you can see what I'm seeing. Maybe, hopefully, that's the dream. Okay. So for starters, what I want us to look at is, I figured we would start with the Cold War. Ironically, I'm writing cold and red because, you know, things. Because communism. Red for communism. Go ahead and text your friends, let them know that we've started. I was hoping it would be able to start at 8:15, but as I said before, sometimes life just be like that, though. Anyways, and so starting with the Cold War, I want us to look at the foreign policies of Truman, and in contrast to that, Eisenhower. Sorry, guys. Again, what to do? Truman, Harry Truman. So a few big things with Harry Truman is basically, he's the one who decides to drop the atomic bombs. He basically gets us out of the war, and it is in his hometown of Fulton, Missouri, that Winston Churchill gives the Iron Curtain speech. Now, his Iron Curtain speech is metaphorical. In his speech, he's talking about the division between democracy and communism. The Iron Curtain is between democracy and communism. Essentially, Western Europe is going to be democratically elected leaders. Eastern Europe is going to be communist, more of the communist regime. That said, it's a whole mood. Versus communism. Democracy versus communism. A lot of these countries at this point have fallen to communism. We were told that, you know, oh, we're not going to let this country fall to communism. It'll be fine. And then turns out they fell to communism. It was a cute day for all of us. Oh, is there anything else about the Iron Curtain I want you to know right now? Basically, it's kind of like creating a Soviet buffer. The Soviets were trying to create a buffer between the West and Germany. And Germany specifically is kind of where that line starts to get drawn between East and West Germany. So that's during the Iron Curtain speech. A few other things kind of get locked down during his presidency. Specifically, we got to, oh my goodness. Sometimes words are hard. He creates NATO. I want to hear from you guys what NATO is. We're going to look at the Marshall Plan. We're going to NATO, the Marshall Plan, the Korean War. And Executive Order 9981 with Truman. Hey, Kristen. So as we're looking at these things, I want to hear from you guys. What are these things? Tell me what you know. Share with me what you know. As you guys are telling me what you know about Truman, I'm going to create the list for Eisenhower as well. Also, can't forget the Truman Doctrine. That seems silly. Okay. So NATO is essentially the Allied forces. Yes. NATO is basically kind of like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Essentially, it's the Allies agreeing to be allies and help each other if one of them has some kind of problem, essentially. Then we have next to the allies agreeing to be allied, next to NATO, we have the red version, or the communist version, is the Warsaw Pact, which is kind of like its equal opposite, which is like the Axis powers. And like the Warsaw Pact is basically the communists saying, we agree that a threat to one of us is a threat to all of us. The Marshall Plan, the U.S. helped rebuild Europe by giving them money. This would increase foreign trade and prevent communism. Okay, so specifically, the Marshall Plan rebuilds Western Europe. Basically, it invests money in rebuilding their infrastructure in the hopes that if we rebuild their infrastructure and increase their standard of living, they won't fall to communism. If people are happy, no communism. Essentially is the idea. The Korean War, basically, North Korea becomes communist in 1945. North Korea, they become communist in 1945. They become communist in 1945 and try to invade South Korea. And the U.S. stops them from invading South Korea. We fight a war about it. U.S. stops the spread to South Korea. During my class, we talked about how the candy of choice during the Korean War was Tootsie Rolls. You know, just because that was a thing. Executive Order 9981. This is horrible quality. Goodness gracious. It's quality though, guys. It's a streaming high quality camera right here. Maybe if I like zoom it in some. Oof. Okay. Executive Order 9981. Essentially, in the government, they try to Truman tries to get all of these laws passed to help people, and Congress is really not having any of it. Southern Democrats are blocking a lot, and so he issues Executive Order 9981 to desegregate the military. The Truman Doctrine was essentially, we will give money and aid to prevent countries from becoming communist. We will give money to help countries fight communism. Specifically, we see this with Turkey and Greece. Can't cook turkey without a little grease, says Papa Truman. So Sabrina just asked, how are the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan different? So essentially, this is giving them money for like military aid. The Marshall Plan is to rebuild infrastructure, because if the infrastructure of Western Europe is strong, then people are not going to need to fight, basically. Like, people are not going to want to spread the wealth because they're already making their own money, that kind of idea. So this is more economic, and this is more military or political. Yeah. And especially we want to give aid to countries to stop communism, kind of in line with what Kennan wanted. Now, brinkmanship. Let's scoot on over to Eisenhower. Let me know if you guys have any more questions about the other one. Brinkmanship. Basically, this is the idea of mutual assured destruction. Eisenhower liked to play this game. It's basically like he liked to play chicken. If you ever heard of chicken, it's basically where you have two cars. It's like a really bad idea, but there used to be this thought that like, oh, this is a fun game to play. You send these two cars in the same direction, and whoever swerves first is the chicken. Now, that said, if whoever swerves first is the chicken, well, oof. Also, maybe they're the logical one. But, you know, sometimes. Essentially, he was bringing us to a lot of brinkmanship. Therefore, during his presidency, people feel a lot more weary of this possibility of nuclear war. It sounds like a real dumb game. Somebody just said on the chat, just said, it sounds like a great game. It sounds real bad. A good question. Did all the things that happened under Truman happen under Truman's time, or did he specifically do or make all of them? They just happened during his presidency. They're not necessarily all his doing. He probably had, so scoot on over, he probably had more to do with things like creating NATO. He enforces the Marshall Plan. He does like help us go to the Korean War. He issues the executive order. These are things that happened during his presidency too, though. It's not necessarily like he was in charge of this, but these are the events of his presidency that really kind of stick out. Another kind of piece of this is somebody asked about the Berlin crisis, the Berlin airlift. We're going to learn more about the Berlin Wall a little bit later, especially when we work on taking that down. But remember that Truman didn't want to go to war immediately. That's why the Berlin crisis, we just like dropped food in. We sent planes that dropped food in in the part of Germany or the part of Berlin that we need. We have stuff dropped in West Berlin. That's what we needed. That's how we send in things. The Eisenhower Doctrine was basically, we are going to keep communism out of the Middle East. This was kind of problematic because, well, Eisenhower did not want to, and other countries. He takes down a lot of leadership, and this isn't necessarily in his doctrine, but essentially during his presidency, he takes down a lot of leaders that he just doesn't like. He takes down all these leaders that he's like, well, they're not pro-America, so if they're not for us, they're against us. Let's take them down and insert a leader that's even better, who is going to like us. Well, the problem is that sometimes those leaders are abusive in their power, and then a person who rises up who super hates America, and that person is given a lot of the power, i.e. what happens in Iran. What happens in Iran when we support the, basically, had to do with the overthrow of the Shah, and another guy comes to power. Yeah. Essentially, the U.S. approves of this plan to overthrow and assassinate the leader of Iran. And it causes some big problems. Things are happening. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to find. Essentially, the U.S. is having issues with oil, as we often do. And essentially, we organize a coup. And much of the money is channeled through the Ayatollah Muhammad. There's just too much information. Calm down. The military coup that overthrows Mossadegh and his National Front cabinet was carried out by the CIA under CIA direction as an act of U.S. foreign policy, conceived and approved at the highest levels of government, basically. Britain helped us in this. Essentially, when we overthrow their leader, Mossadegh is one of the reasons for Iranian mistrust. There's mistrust of Americans from the Iranians, and it causes a lot of problems, especially later on. So, yeah, so when somebody asked, so Truman's whole thing was no war, and Eisenhower was like, bring it on. Lauren, Laura, Truman's policy wasn't no war, but he was like no war unless it's absolutely necessary. Was the Chinese Civil War during Truman's or Eisenhower's presidency. The Chinese Civil War takes place between 1945 and 1949, so that would be during Truman's presidency. If we run out of oil, what will we drink? That's a weird mood. Essentially, with Eisenhower facilitates many coups on communist dictators in Latin America as well. And y'all, some of these coups that he's a part of, the other leader gets into power and then the people don't like that person. And so when that person is overthrown and a communist leader, an anti-American leader gets in place, now it's kind of like that person is saying, we super don't like you because you're trying to interfere in a country where you don't belong. The mullet of dynamic conservatism under Eisenhower. This is something I do with my classes because it makes sense to me. Essentially, it's the idea of, you know what a mullet is? Business in the front, party in the back. So you got, your business here in the front and, your party here in the back. You just got a dude who's just like living his life because, he is. Also, he vaguely looks like a hedgehog, but it's fine. In your business in the front, party in the back, you have conservative with money, with money and economics. But when it comes to people, you're more liberal. You're more loosey-goosey, you're more hippy-dippy when it comes to people and humans. Erica, you don't need to know the Cuban Missile Crisis. We haven't gotten there yet. That happens during JFK's presidency. With Eisenhower, he avoids nuclear war, and also during his presidency, as part of this loving people business, we have Brown versus Board of Education pop up. And there's a lot of Southern resistance to it, as there often is to things during this era. And within that Southern resistance is the refusal to integrate, which kind of culminates in the Little Rock Nine. Essentially, the children who were hoping to go to school, and they had to end up sending in the federal government to force them to go because the state government was trying to refuse it from happening. And in fact, not only the state government, but not only the federal government, but the local school board had approved all of this to happen. And the state government was trying to stop it. So there was kind of multiple parts that weren't good there. We supported the overthrow. Let's see. Supported the overthrow of the person. That's kind of what I have for Eisenhower. Yeah, Eisenhower is very bold, but you have to remember that like Dwight D. Eisenhower is also like D-Day Eisenhower. He is military to his core. The reading was JFK on. So do we need to know any of that? Jalen, the reading is for after your test. So the reading, no, that's for civil rights. It's recovering after the test. We'll start that on like Thursday, Friday. Siri, what was the fair deal? The fair deal was Truman's goal for domestic policy. He was trying to make sure that Americans got a fair deal, especially after the war, especially when it came to unions. And he was trying to do some really great things for people. And especially in a post-World War II world where the government or the economy is changing and stuff like that, he tries to shut down labor union. Like he tries to help like with labor unions and stuff. Moving on from that, because I need to kind of keep us moving forward, is the Red Scare. And this is really anything to do with communism, if I'm honest. Like, it's really just anything to do with communism down here. So within the Red Scare, we have our big fear is Sputnik. That's one of the big fears we have. It's this like crazy looking satellite that they launch into space. And Americans have this like crazy fear. And I say that's what it looks like. Also, it vaguely looks like a terrifying cactus, but it's fine. Sputnik is launched, and Americans lose their mind because, oh no, the Russians are going to start shooting lasers at us. Because they have no concept of how people really didn't have any concept of how what's it called? How a satellite worked. And so it was like super terrifying. But it's one of the few instances that this happens. They create the NDEA, the National Defense Education Act, which increases money for math and science education. Basically, Sputnik proved that the Russians had supreme space technology, and so we create a federal agency for education. Within this, we also have kind of a scarier mode. We have McCarthyism. I'm going to put up a few things about McCarthyism. I want you guys to kind of write down what you know, share what you know. Russians and their lasers. This is what I'm saying, Dallas. Those Russians and their lasers. McCarthyism. Okay, so McCarthyism, essentially, tell me a little bit about that. I'm going to write down a few of those little pieces that go along with this. We have Alger Hiss. We have the Vanilla Papers. We have the criticism of it, and there's a lot. Yeah, Flack. All right, so tell me what we got. Senator McCarthy pretended to have a list of commies. Very true. People were blacklisted, couldn't get jobs. McCarthy accused 205 people from the State Department of communism, of being spies. Yeah, he accused the army of being communist, and then everyone was like, "Eeh, this guy. Maybe he's not so right. Maybe he's big wrong." So basically, McCarthy uses HUAC, which is the House of Un-American Activities Coalition or something like that. They were created in 1938. I think it's the House of Un-American Activities Committee or something like that. Spotting commies is their job. Spotting commies is their job. He became disgraced after he accused so many people of, yes, there were trials that brought him down. Basically, the trials go on TV and people are like, this man's nuts. McCarthy was convicting innocent people of being communist based on suspicion and not facts. He used fear to further his own political career, which later leads to his downfall. He was the one who got accused for the second Red Scare. Yeah, he didn't get accused for the second Red Scare, but he kind of like definitely fed into it. He sent people to eliminate communist headquarters. It was a whole thing. So all these things, yes, he absolutely did those. Thanks, Joe McCarthy. What can you guys tell me about the Vanilla Papers or Alger Hiss? If you don't know, go ahead and look that up. Then let me know. Criticisms, I saw some good ones. It was based on suspicion. Another big thing too, guys, is that it was this whole idea of, do we give people freedom to believe what they want, or do we care about order and people following the rules? So it's kind of like freedom versus order. Essentially during this, because he's like getting so terrified of everyone, he shuts down lots of labor organizations and some civil rights leaders too. Accuses them of being communists. It's a whole thing. Dallas, he was actually an alcoholic. I'm pretty sure that's what he died of. Alger Hiss was the federal worker found guilty of being a communist. He is kind of like the catalyst. He was found guilty of communist ties. The Vanilla Papers was provided a list. Provided a list of possible commies. Thank you for telling me my screen is blurry. Sometimes I don't get to see it. Also, under the Red Scare, this is how we create NASA too. NASA comes into play here. Okay, so that's the Cold War, the Red Scare, and the things. If you have questions, write them down. I'll come back to them in a little bit. Next piece, the 1950s. We're going to do the 1950s. Then we're going to do period 5, and then we are good. So the 1950s. The 1950s as an era, we have the American Dream. We have conformity. And civil rights. Okay, so part of the American Dream is who acted? They shut down the labor organizations. Kind of. They more so like purge them. The HUAC were like the commie hunters. Yes, Dallas. I feel like it's a good way of thinking of them. So essentially, one of the big ways that we support the American Dream is when soldiers come home from war, they get something called the Servicemen Readjustment Act. Now, if I say this, I want you guys to think of what is it actually? What's another way of saying this? The GI Bill. There you go. Another way of saying this is the GI Bill. Now, the GI Bill, in its heart of hearts, did a lot of really good things. Basically, when servicemen came home, the government would support their educational needs. They would support their small business loans. If they wanted to buy houses, they would back the loans on those houses. There was one glaring problem, though, with the GI Bill. What was the big glaring problem with the GI Bill? What was one glaring problem? All these things seem so great. Then we got something that's problematic. Essentially, it excludes minorities in a very big way. If you were white. Because essentially what the government would say was, here's the thing, these homes that you want to buy are in white neighborhoods, and an integrated neighborhood is a more high risk. So thereby, that's a more high risk loan. So we're not going to give you that high risk loan. For education, African Americans were not allowed at all schools. And so, and the schools that they were allowed at, the historically black colleges, were already filled. They were at capacity. And at the time, the most diverse, we talked about the most like diverse school in the nation was Pennsylvania State University, I'm pretty sure. And of their 9,000 students, 40 were African American. And that was like the pinnacle of diversity at the time. Same with businesses. A lot of ugly practices that kind of go along with this. In fact, we have the rise of suburbs, and it means that the suburbs are largely white. We have the creation of Levittowns. And in the creation of Levittowns, which were these little suburban communities, they excluded African Americans. These Levittowns, they also they promote conformity. They promoted conformity. They promote this idea of they kind of promote the rise of the middle class, but it's basically they support this idea of the American dream of here, look at all the things you can have, but it doesn't do that for everyone. And so eventually, what happens is within all of these events, this is where we see the start of the civil rights movement start to kind of make headway. Moving over to conformity. Part of the rise of conformity has to do with it's caused by the Red Scare. Partially, too, the rise of suburbs. If you've ever been to, you guys live in neighborhoods, you see houses a lot of times where it's like the same floor plan as you. There is a sense of everybody's the same when we have this practice of kind of sameness, if you will. And so within this, and in this rise of conformity, we also have a counterculture develop. What is the counterculture of the 50s? The counterculture of the 50s that is about nonconformity. You have the beatniks, the rise of the beatniks. Beatniks who are primarily artists. They're artists, they're intellectuals. A lot of times they're young people who kind of have their own ideas of what things should be. Basically, that's kind of the pièce de résistance here, is that all of this conformity gives rise to counterculture, beatniks, and artists, which eventually, when we get to the 60s, the counterculture becomes kind of the mainstream culture. It's a whole thing. Within this, we have things like, let's see, rock and roll. The term teenager is coined during this era. We'd never used the term teenager before. And that's part of teenage culture is rock and roll. Promoting uniformity of thought. Another piece of kind of the Red Scare fears and outside of civil rights. I was going to say home life. basically it's miscellaneous things. We have duck and cover. We have fallout shelters. Basically, it kind of goes with conformity in that the reason we're conforming is because we have some very real fears. The Red Scare has given rise to some very real fears. And within those fears, we have duck and cover. We have fallout shelters. We have people creating these because they fear nuclear attack. They fear nuclear bombs. Also, during this time, there is a polio outbreak. And this is where we introduce the polio vaccine by Jonas Salk. I know some of you read the book Small Steps in elementary school about the girl who gets all different kinds of polio. Polio is basically a disease that it causes different types of paralysis, and there's like 3 kinds. I want to say it's respiratory, there's bulbar, and spinal. Essentially, there's one that makes it hard to breathe. There's one that stops your involuntary movements like swallowing. It paralyzes that. And then there's spinal, which makes you unable to walk. Salk did not cure this. He found a vaccine to prevent other children from getting it. Essentially, what would happen if you got polio is a lot of children were sent away from their families. And this was like when we have the iron lung. The girl in the book, she has to be in an iron lung. She has all 3 types. She talks about the chocolate shake that saved her life. It's a fantastic little read if you've never read it before. And she talks about how she was so tearfully happy when her children got their vaccine. And the vaccine was given in sugar cubes, which was kind of a thing. The idea, a spoonful of sugar. The song, A Spoonful of Sugar, was actually written because the Sherman brothers, one of their kids came home and he was like, yeah, at school we were giving the polio vaccine. And his dad was like, oh, so they had to give you a shot? And he goes, no, we just took it with some sugar. And in his mind, he thought a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. And that's where that's how the polio vaccine influenced A Spoonful of Sugar from Mary Poppins. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but still. I mean, it does have to do with what we're talking about, but it's an interesting little tidbit about how art influences, or how art is influenced by the history that surrounds us. So that's pretty much what I got for you. Brown versus Board of Education. We have, within civil rights, we're not going to have a whole lot here, but we have Brown v. Board. And we have Montgomery bus boycott. We have the Little Rock Nine. Okay. Last things. Any questions about any of this? And the next thing I'm going to tell you guys, just for period 5, do you guys have any specific questions about period 5? I will answer 5 questions about period 5. If you answer somebody's questions in the chat before I do, I won't answer it, and you answer it correctly, I won't answer it here. Joe, what caused the rise in consumerism? Essentially, people had money and people could spend money. That's what leads after the war. Soldiers get home, they get their GI Bill, they get money, they're back to work. I believe during this time period, it also led to a lot of like women actually started. There's a lot more discontent. Housewives started feeling a lot more discontent because they had worked. So many of them had worked during the war and felt a sense of purpose. And then when they were forced back, when they were not forced back, but when they returned back to the home, that sense of purpose is kind of lost. And this actually kind of increases the role that like psychiatry, I think, played in America as well. Period 5 questions. Anything from y'all's review sheet and your list of topics you guys have questions about? Anything more you want to know? Got about 25 of you watching. Debt, stock market crash. Joe, those are from like the 1920s. We're looking at stuff that has to do with like the Civil War, causes of the Civil War, Reconstruction. Okay. Polk's Manifest Destiny. Polk, Manifest Destiny, Man Goes Westiny. He was all about people moving further west. He ran under the slogan like 54 or fight, but in the end he wanted to compromise with Great Britain. And we get Oregon at the 49th parallel. Radical Republicans essentially are the ones who when the South wants to rejoin, they basically punish the South. And they're pretty harsh with the South. They force the South to become military districts before they can be let back into the Union. They have to ratify the 14th Amendment. Compromise of 1877 officially ends the Civil War, or ends not the Civil War. It officially ends Reconstruction. And the North agrees to leave the South, and the North agrees to leave the South if Rutherford B. Hayes, I believe, can win the election. That's kind of what it came down to. Turning points of the Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation, and Gettysburg. Gettysburg, basically, we kind of talked about there's like a shift in the narrative that after the Emancipation Proclamation, we're fighting to end slavery. After Gettysburg, we shift the focus to we're no longer fighting to end slavery. We're fighting so those who have died will have not died in vain. The Compromise of 1877, significance of Fort Sumter. I already said the Compromise of 1877, I believe. Significance of Fort Sumter. This is where the Civil War starts. FS, Fort Sumter, first shots. Temmie, the act that stopped the labor unions, that was the Harley. Oh goodness, I have it written down somewhere. It's not the Harley Smoot. It's two names. One starts with an H and one starts with a T. I'm about 90% sure. It's the Holly. Hold on. It's not, oh my gosh. It's not the Holly Smoot tariff. It's the. Somebody tell me what it is, because I'm confused now. I've confused myself. The Taft-Hartley tariff. There you go. I was like, there's an H and a T, and I get it confused. The Taft-Hartley Act. Yes, that's the one that breaks up labor unions. First battle of the Civil War was Fort Sumter. Essentially, Fort Sumter for first shots. Basically, Lincoln kind of tricks the South into firing on the North. It's a whole mood. Anything else? No, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. Free citizens vote. All right, any questions? Y'all, we're kept this under an hour today. I tried to be soups helpful and well planned out. I had a whole list of things. All right, you guys got me for 2 more minutes. Anything else you want me to explain? Been quiet for a long time. Probably just you can hear me breathing, which is kind of weird to me, but you know, life. All right, folks. Have a great night. Be sure you're looking over your notes. Be sure you're understanding. You're not just going with it. Be sure you understand what you're looking at. Be sure you understand what you're learning. If there is a concept that you are unsure of, guys, go to YouTube, go to History Channel. History Channel does a good job of getting to you what the impact is, because that's kind of the most important part. Sometimes you guys get really hung up about what something is, but the reason we study it is because of its impact. Jalen, the Iron Curtain speech I talked about at the beginning, essentially what it is it's a speech where Winston Churchill goes to Truman's home of Fulton, Missouri, and he basically says the Iron Curtain has been drawn, essentially saying that like Western Europe and Eastern Europe are divided by this metaphorical Iron Curtain. This metaphorical Iron Curtain that essentially separating Russian ideals from American ideals. This feels like less than normal. It is kind of less than normal because we've only had like 2 weeks of information really to go into this. Really, we just started with like Cold War. It is kind of a short amount of information. Also in the live stream, I prepared for it the way I always intend to prepare for them, so that could go quicker. But y'all just be sure you know like the differences between things. Look at that study sheet. Look at that study sheet. Add value to that study sheet. Give yourself pictures. Find some memes. Find some GIFs. Bring yourself some joy. You guys have a wonderful evening. I hope this was helpful. Now I'm going to see if I can watch Roswell tonight because I finished in time, and also get started on grading some of those SAQs because life. Thank you guys for your kindness. One of my teacher friends, I was like, yeah, I got to get back because I got to go do a live stream. She's like, why would you plan something after? And I was like, you know, my kiddos, I was like, when I tell them like I have something, they're like, it's okay, you can do it after. And she said, well, shout out to your needy students. Tell them to kill that test. And I say needy in the most loving way possible. I appreciate being needed, and I appreciate y'all's appreciation. You guys are awesome. Thank you guys for staying up with us. You're superstars. You're going to kill your test. I'm proud to be your YouTube teacher. It's a weird day. Hello?